Now, I was casually writing my video up for this news story right here, talking about CMON selling some of their old games to Tabletop Tycoon. And I knew from reading this, they were talking about there is one more sale coming soon. So I was going to wait to see what happened when the other shoe dropped. And holy crap, not only did that shoe drop, but it made a heck of a thud. That other IP being sold by CMON was none other than Zombicide. Now, this company, CMON, essentially launched its tabletop gaming career on a ridiculously successful Kickstarter for this franchise. This is their main intellectual property, and they sold it to Asmodee. But of course, you're obviously thinking, well, if you sell your main intellectual property, that's probably not a good thing. And no, it really is not. So a few weeks ago, I was looking at the financial report of CMON from 2024, doing some math, making some making some estimates about how this year is going to play out for them. And it looked like they're going to be short millions of dollars in terms of what revenue they were bringing in versus their estimated expenses. One of the thoughts that I had was, well, maybe they're going to go ahead and sell themselves to another company. And it doesn't look like that is happening exactly. We got some more things we can look at in that first press release a little bit later. But they are piecemealing themselves out, which is one way to sell off some of your intellectual property to go ahead and bring in more revenue. And I think with these two sales between the Tabletop Tycoon as well as primarily the sale of Zombicide to Asmodee, they probably have enough money to kind of limp through this year. Not a guarantee, but we'll see how things work out. Tabletop Tycoon primarily bought a number of the older board games from CMON. We see here Arcadia Quest, Starcadia Quest, and the Legendary series, which was Blood Rage, Rising Sun, and Ankh, Gods of Egypt. Is that how you pronounce that? I have no clue. So most of these games were fairly old. Blood Rage, that was published around 2015. Rising Sun was somewhere in the area of 2018. I believe this game here was somewhere in the range of 2021 to 2022. There are copies of these games still floating around the internet, but I think for the most part, they're not really being actively published. As for Arcadia Quest, that was first published back in 2014 or something like that, and there were several more expansions published, and AI, if you want to trust that or not, is telling me there is stuff published as of 2020. When it comes to the company Tabletop Tycoon, I honestly don't have a whole lot of experience with them. We can kind of take a quick look at some of the games they have for sale here. The one that I have played was based on the Princess Bride movie. This is the game right here. It's the Princess Bride Battle of Wits. I'm pretty sure I played first edition. I don't know how this game already has a third edition. There's really not much to it. It's trying to recreate the scene from the movie where you had the Dread Pirate Roberts with the inconceivable guy, and then was the iocane poison powder and the swapping of cups around and trying to drink to not drink and see who dies. I think it's safe to describe this as a party game. You can play up to 10 people with it, so it's not the most exciting, in-depth type of tabletop game. It's really good for when you have lots of people and you just want to have some mindless fun, or you want to mess around with players. You can do that too. And I'd imagine, even though it's not marketed as such, it's probably a game where if you have a lot of alcohol, it'd be even more enjoyable if you're into that type of thing. There was one other Princess Bride game from this company that I played. It was also a fairly simple one, not a lot to it, but that's just the way these Princess Bride games were designed. So I don't have a whole lot of experience with some of the more interesting games from this company, so I don't have a whole lot more to say on that particular topic. Now, if we jump back to the press release for the sale, though, there is one interesting thing I want to visit from previous videos. In the first paragraph, we read here, "Today, we have an exciting update on the future of some of our intellectual properties. As you know, CMON entered negotiations in mid-2024 to transfer some of its IPs, and we're happy to announce that we've concluded agreements with two parties to take possession of a number of product lines." Blah, blah, blah. It's this comment here talking about how CMON entered into negotiations in mid-2024 to transfer some of its intellectual properties. I want to jump back to an article from earlier in the year from Board Game Wire. So this is one I talked about back when there were some warning signs that CMON was not doing that well, and they were warning their investors about, hey, we may have lost a whole bunch of money last year. Midway through the article, we see this line right here. The latest announcement continues a tricky start to the year for CMON, which began 2025 with an agreement to sell some of its intellectual property in a $12 million deal. In addition to expecting to receive the $1.39 million from new shareholders in exchange for a 16.66% stake in the business. CMON had entered a non-binding agreement to sell the unspecified IPs last August, but terminated the agreement last month after CMON and the unnamed buyer failed to agree to terms. So when it came to that particular comment right there in the article, I was like, I didn't have a good source for why it had failed. All I had found was a link to essentially a Chinese stock trading tip website. I'm not sure the veracity of that. That was basically the best I could find, the source for the fact that the negotiations for the purchase of these intellectual properties has failed. Except now we've got two successful negotiations for intellectual property, which raises two questions that we don't really have a good answer for. The first part was this rumor about these intellectual property sales collapsing, completely made up, maybe incorrectly, or maybe it's completely dishonest, fake news type of thing. You have to consider the possibility that someone was intentionally trying to crash the stock and then buy the dip once the stock price dropped down, and then maybe it would recover and they would make some money. It's important to note that that is pretty much something illegal to do, so don't actually try to do that. The only thing about that particular strategy is if someone did that, there really wasn't a price drop back when this whole thing went down. And since then, the stock price for CMON really hasn't recovered that much. This bump right here is actually kind of interesting because this is a bump that occurred when the sales of the 3 or 4 games I talked about earlier, the Tabletop Tycoon, occurred. Their stock price saw a bit of a nice bump and then it immediately dropped back down to where it's pretty much been since the bad news about their financial condition was formally published. And the second possibility is maybe the deal did collapse and that Tabletop Tycoon and Asmodee are your second place finishers. Now, maybe Tabletop Tycoon was a second place finisher, but currently CMON distributes their products through Asmodee. So I would almost have to think that Asmodee would not be a second place company. They would be probably a very likely company to buy intellectual property from CMON because of that existing business relationship that's already in place. And finally, when it came to these negotiations for the intellectual property, we see that the agreement was supposedly worth $12 million. And obviously the handful of games that got sold off the Tabletop Tycoon was definitely not a $12 million deal, but I could very easily see Zombicide being worth something in that particular range of $12 million. If we just look back at some of the Zombicide Kickstarters here, we got one that is $5 million in revenue. White Death, which is the most recent one, is a little short of $4 million. Deceased, which was a little while ago, that's $2.5 million. It was one of the superhero ones. Zombicide second edition, almost $3.5 million. And I could go on like this for a while. There are plenty more properties in the Zombicide franchise to look at, but every one of them brings in several million dollars when it goes up on Kickstarter. And that, of course, does not factor in any additional money made at retail sales and such going on into the future. And that's about all I got for you guys today. One thing I forgot to do was do a promotion for my line of Fractured Colony gaming miniatures because I forgot to walk into my game room and get out the full-size version of the Manticore right here, which is going to be part of the upcoming crowdfunding campaign in just a little while. But if you do head over to fracturedcolony.com, you can check out guys like the Bracer, which is one of the original miniatures from my line of 3D printable gaming miniatures. We'll see what the future is for CMON at this point. This might be enough money to get them through the next year at least. We can look at one last thing in the press release to see what they're saying about the future. While the tariff situation has seen some temporary relief, we will continue to pause the launch of new crowdfunding campaigns until things have further stabilized. When we do resume with new campaigns, they'll be exciting as ever, and you'll hear about them well in advance. So at least CMON's trying to put in the face that things are going to turn around at some point, but time will definitely tell. Anyway, thank you guys all for watching. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. As I just mentioned about 15 seconds ago, head over to fracturedcolony.com one more time to take a look at my line of 3D printable gaming miniatures. Okay, I'll see you guys all next time.